Got my Murky D somewhere.
I just got what you meant by that.
Deaths in police custody or during arrests haunt justice systems worldwide, exposing deep failures in accountability, training, and basic human care. These kinds of cases happen everywhere and to all kinds of people. What starts as a routine arrest often spirals into a deadly encounter, leaving families shattered and communities outraged. Each case brings the same questions. Why does this keep happening? And who is responsible? And of course, why aren't any lessons ever learned? Law enforcement may be following protocol, but often it's the very procedure that inflicts untold harm. In today's video, we will cover two distinct cases where lives were lost at the hands of those sworn to protect them. But before we start, a thank you to today's sponsor, Factor. This video is sponsored by Factor. I have a friend who lives in the US of A and uses Factor meals, and whenever I visit, I ask them to sort some out for me before I arrive. I swear her friends. Not only are US takeaways extremely expensive, but they're also unbelievably unhealthy, so if I'm there for a few weeks it becomes a real problem. Using Factor solves these two terrible issues. You can eat stress-free with Factor's scrum-diddly-umptious ready-to-eat meals. The meals are fresh, never frozen, chef-crafted, dietitian approved, and are ready to eat in just 2 minutes. I'm also incredibly lazy, so Factor eliminates the hassle of prepping and cleaning up. Just heat up the meal and you're good to go. You can choose a weekly menu of 35 options, including Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, Veggie, and even Vegan. With Factor, you can rest assured that you're making a sustainable choice. The company offsets 100% of its delivery emissions, and sources 100% renewable electricity for their production sites and offices. If this sounds good to you, you can get 50% off your order and free shipping on your first Factor box. Just click the link in the description or pinned in the comments, so go ahead and check them out. And now, on to the video. This case takes place in the USA in the year 2016. Meet Anthony Timper. Anthony, also known as Tony, was born on the 5th of June 1984. He was born in Rockwell, Texas, and lived there for all of his life, alongside his sisters Jamie May and Julie Marie. Tony was a kind, curious, and loving boy. During his time at school, he stood out as an intelligent and gifted young man. As he moved up to Rockwell High School, his successes in the classroom continued. Tony graduated from high school in 2003 with honors. By this time in his academic career, his father Joe Timper was 4 years into his successful business venture. Joe had started a company called American National Logistics Incorporated, which transformed into one of the best transportation companies in the whole of Texas. It is assumed that this may have shaped Tony's choice in further education. He was awarded an academic scholarship to Baylor University, where he took business classes. When he left college, he became an integral player in his father's company, along with another company, and he was eventually promoted to the director of operations for both companies, overseeing every detail and driving a period of unprecedented growth under his leadership. He was deeply dedicated to his family and their businesses, and he was making over $250,000 every single year. In his free time, Tony enjoyed sports. He loved golfing, jet skiing, snow skiing, and attending pro sporting events. But his greatest joy was spending time with his son. Tony had his son in 2008 and named him Colton Timper. Tony was also a devout Christian and was engaged to marry a woman named Evelina. Tony Timper had it all, the true American dream. However, he also had some internal struggles over the year. Despite being highly productive and excelling in most things he did, he was also diagnosed with schizophrenia. Tony was often debilitated by this affliction and was diagnosed with anxiety and depression too. He was treated and medicated for these conditions, but unofficially, he liked to self-medicate with party drugs and alcohol. On occasion, Tony would consume cocaine. He was a good man, but not perfect. Tony had once been caught driving under the influence, but by 2016, he hadn't had any serious run-ins with the law. His mother described him as someone who admired and trusted the police, even going as far as saying that he idolized them. This trust, along with Tony's successes and future potential, makes what happened to him on the evening of the 10th of August 2016 especially hard to bear. Tony Timper was 32 years old on the 10th of August. He had been out drinking and consuming alcohol. This was something he had done countless times. But it wasn't very often he would go out without taking his medication. Late into the evening, Tony started having a psychotic episode and had a conflict with two nearby security guards along a storefront down Mockingbird Lane. This situation was dangerous and made him a threat to himself and the others around him. He gathered himself enough to call 911, reaching out to the police for assistance responsibly. This was the best thing he could have done at the time. However, the conflict continued, and Tony ran out of an adult video store and walked right into the middle of traffic. The two security guards restrained him with handcuffs and laid him on the floor until the Dallas police officers arrived. Tony was physically subdued and no longer a plausible threat to anyone else around him. The three officers who arrived that day were Sergeant Kevin Mansell and officers Danny Vaquez and Dustin Dillard, and later another officer soon joined, called Raymond Dominguez. When they arrived, a wave of anxiety ran through Tony. He was convinced that they were here to kill him. Tony kept on saying, "You're going to kill me." The officers responded to this very ill man having a mental breakdown with the words "chill out" and "relax, buddy." But Tony couldn't relax. He thought he was now going to die and that he must fight for his life. Tony tried making his way up onto his feet, so one of the security guards held his feet down whilst Dustin Dillard mounted his back and held him down with his knee placed on the back of his ribcage. Police instructions are to do precisely that in this case. However, they are also instructed to place a person on their side once they are adequately bound, and if it is safe to do so. Limiting the time spent compressing a person under arrest is a priority. The police officers exchanged Tony's handcuffs for official police handcuffs, and then they cable-tied his feet and elevated them. One may argue that this was the earliest opportunity to now release the knee from his upper spine and chest area. Now think of this for just a moment. Have an 80-kilogram man place his knee on your back whilst your legs are being raised behind you and try to breathe. You might struggle. Tony's nightmare was coming to fruition. Tony instantly shouted, "Oh my God, I can't breathe." He continued to shout, "Help me," but Dustin Dillard didn't release his knee. And the other police officers, they didn't intervene. They just kept tapping him on the shoulder, telling him that everything will be okay. All Tony could do was try and remain calm, and ask for them to stop with the restraint. Pretty quickly, Tony started becoming increasingly incoherent, with his legs wriggling in an erratic way. The police never let up because Tony was reportedly, quote, squirming. Paramedics soon arrived on the scene with the intention of sedating and securing Tony, but they didn't act quickly enough. The police then started making jokes, saying that Tony needed a Green Oak cocktail. This was in reference to a sedative used at Green Oak, which is a private psychiatric facility in Dallas. This joke did not age well. Neither did their remaining jokes. Tony's noises turned to mumbling and eventually to silence as the officers started to ask if he was okay. All the while, the officers maintained their hold and the knee placed on his back. The officers then started laughing, saying, "WTF, is he asleep?" When they thought he had simply fallen to sleep, they started role-playing a typical interaction between a mother and a child in the morning before school. Kevin said, "Time for school, wake up," and Danny laughed. Then Dustin Dillard joined in, putting on a voice that imitated Tony, and said, "I don't want to go to school today, Mum." This back and forth continued, and was truly harrowing to watch. Finally, after over 14 minutes of chest compression and restraint, the paramedic administered a sedative, placing it into his left shoulder. The police held Tony down for another 30 seconds and then decided to place him on a medical stretcher. Tony's body was limp. Officer Dustin was confused and asked if he was still breathing. One officer then said, "I hope we didn't kill him." The remaining officers then laughed. As the paramedics placed him into the ambulance, they were shocked to realize that Tony was indeed not breathing. The officers' attitudes then drastically changed, and Tony was soon pronounced dead. One of the paramedics had Tony's mother on the phone throughout the whole ordeal. Her world came crumbling down when she was told that her beloved son Tony had passed away. Vicky Timper was confused. How did her son die? He was with the police and the paramedics, and they were there to help. In August of 2016, Tony Timper died during an encounter with the Dallas police force, and a coroner listed his death as sudden cardiac arrest from cocaine, combined with the stress of an excessive physical restraint, causing positional asphyxiation. Initially, authorities portrayed Tony as aggressive and cited the presence of cocaine in his system. The Dallas Police Department immediately withheld the names of the officers involved. They also refused to release the body camera footage. In 2018, Danny resigned from the Dallas police force, but the other 3 officers continued their duty. Meanwhile, Tony's family fought to get the footage released. After a prolonged legal battle, the footage was eventually made public in 2019, a whole 3 years after. The footage contradicted the police officer's earlier claims and showed that Tony was restrained while pleading for help, and that he was not being aggressive. And it was noted that the Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office ruled Tony's death a homicide due to the effects of the illegal substances and being restrained.
These guys,
They're not real.
check them, they won't tell you. Obviously, we've been
Check them, they won't show you.
The street and everything.
They won't
I
show
see
you.
it.
So,
Gotcha. Yeah, definitely. Definitely taking a ride.
6 here.
You got any name on them or anything?
Just Tony's the only thing we can get.
Help
out of.
me! Tony!
Hey, get on the ground.
No, you're gonna kill me.
I'm not gonna kill
You're gonna kill me. You're gonna kill me.
You let me go, please.
Hey, Tony. We're trying to help you out, man. Just relax. Hey, sign me over here, so I can unbuckle these.
Okay.
Trying to switch out cuffs while we got him
Help
controlled a little bit.
me!
There we go. There we go.
All right.
Get a Green Oaks cocktail special.
Yeah.
it. It is.
That's what she said.
Luck employee, don't you luck employee?
It'll be alright.
Got my Murky D somewhere.
I just got what you meant by that.
Come on, fall.
Is he knocked out or he ain't dead, is he?
Nah, he just moves.
Oh, okay.
I think.
That was a little freaky. He didn't just die down there, did he?
The Timper family was furious, and they had the support of Rockwell City. This sparked a criminal case against the officers. However, in March of 2019, the Dallas County District Attorney dropped the charges and declined to prosecute the case. All 3 of the officers returned to active duty. As the Timper family didn't receive the justice they believed to be owed, they sought justice through a civil court. The civil lawsuit alleged excessive force and a violation of Tony's constitutional rights. The family was confident that with the Dallas medical report, and along with the footage, that they would be successful and that they would receive some form of justice. But this was dismissed in July of 2020 by the US District Judge David Godby, who cited qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is a legal doctrine that can shield government officials from liability under certain conditions. That is, if the conditions are unique and are not accounted for in law currently. Even if the acts now appear to be unlawful or a violation, which is a little bit strange. However, there was some good news to come. The Timper family kept fighting, and on the 15th of December 2021, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed the qualified immunity ruling. The men can now stand trial in a civil court. Before the trial, 6 months later in May of 2022, Dustin Dillard and Kevin Mansell were promoted to sergeant, and Raymond was promoted to senior corporal, and Dustin was even placed in charge of training other officers. This caused uproar in Rockwell, and the population couldn't understand how these men were still in uniforms. The civil trial faced several delays, as authorities were worried that intense media coverage could influence the outcome. It would be in September of 2023 that proceedings finally began. During this trial, the jury was tasked with determining if the Dallas police officer Justin Dillard used excessive force and violated his constitutional rights by kneeling on his back for over 14 minutes. They also had to decide whether the 3 other officers, Kevin, Raymond, and Danny, failed in their duty to intervene when Tony cried out for help over 35 times. It was then concluded that Dustin, Raymond, and Danny were at fault, but that Kevin Mansell was not. In September of 2023, a jury found the 3 officers liable for Tony Timper's wrongful death and awarded $1 million to his son, Colton. Although, following the verdict, 2 jurors expressed regret for not granting a larger sum of money to Timper's family. This case takes place in the United Kingdom in the year 1998. Meet Christopher Alder. Christopher was born on the 25th of June 1960 in Hull, Yorkshire. His ethnicity was Black British, with his parents being of Nigerian descent. Christopher was raised in the care system alongside his siblings. Unfortunately, there is little information about his childhood, his Nigerian heritage, and his close family, besides his brother Richard and his sister Janet. However, it is understood, by the age of 16, he had successfully joined the Royal Army's Parachute Regiment. Christopher served his country for 6 years, which included tours of Northern Ireland. For those who know their history, this was during the horrific time of the conflicts between the United Kingdom and the Irish Republican Army. During his period in the army, Christopher had 2 sons. After leaving the army, Christopher settled in Andover with the mother of his children. Although the relationship soon deteriorated and he moved back to Hull in 1990. By 1998, Christopher was trying to better himself and was taking a college course in computer skills. On the 1st of April 1998, at 7 p.m, Christopher and a group of friends headed out into Hull city centre. The group planned to go out drinking. One man out that night was named Jason Paul. Despite being friends, the two ended up in an altercation with each other. This ultimately resulted in fists being thrown outside the Waterfront Club. Jason threw a punch which knocked Christopher out unconscious. It is also alleged that he was out cold for around 11 minutes after hitting his head on the ground. Club staff and friends took care of him in the time it took for the paramedics to arrive. When they arrived, they wasted no time and took him to the hospital to assess the level of his injuries. However, Christopher had a fear of hospitals after an ordeal with his dislocated shoulder in 1991, whereby it is reported that he kicked a doctor. Not only this, he had a hematoma at the rear of his head caused by the impact, though not consistent with a direct blow. There was localized swelling on the left side of his upper lip, along with 2 non-bleeding wounds in the same area. His front left canine tooth was knocked out, and the adjacent tooth on the upper left side was loosened and pushed inward, so it is clear that he experienced a traumatic head injury. This, mixed with alcohol consumption, meant that he became very uncooperative with medical officials, and he became aggressive. Medical staff attempted to x-ray Alder's head injury, but he wouldn't stay still, leading them to abandon the procedure. There were 2 police officers in attendance at the scene and at the hospital. They were PC Dawson and PC Blakely. The hospital staff could no longer handle Christopher's aggression. Despite the risks of leaving him untreated, they called for the police to assist. According to the reports, he refused treatment and the officers dragged Chris outside and arrested him for breach of the peace. A third officer, named PC Ellerington, arrived in a van to pick Christopher up to transport him to the Queen's Gardens police station, while PC Dawson and PC Blakely followed in their car. It is suspected that the police officers used sear spray to subdue Christopher before placing him in the police van. Also, blood smears were found in the van, which is evidence of either untreated wounds from the previous fight or additional wounds inflicted by the officers. However, additional assaults and use of spray were never proven. PC Ellerington arrived with Christopher at 0346 in the morning. By the time that Christopher was delivered to the police station, he had become unresponsive and was slumped over the seating of the van. The three officers assumed that he was faking an illness or pretending to be asleep, and so they dragged Christopher into the Queen's Garden custody suite, handcuffed with his trousers around his ankles, and forced him face down onto the ground. When they came in, the three officers explained to the attending police officers PC Dunn and PC Barr that he was right as rain and had been seen at the hospital already. The police officers just stood and stared, discussing what to charge Christopher with. Meanwhile, Christopher was making gurgling, guttural sounds. The police officers believed that he was just acting, and they discussed how when they left the hospital he was awake, aggressive, and was swearing at the police. But the sounds Christopher was making grew deeper. Blood and vomit were congealing and blocking his airways. The police officers stood over him as blood was still leaving his mouth. Some officers even thought that this whole situation was funny, and they began to laugh. In Christopher's unconscious state, he began spitting blood onto the floor. The police officers believed that he was trying to spit at them. During this period, it is alleged that they were making references to banana boats and the Ku Klux Klan. And throughout this time, there were also allegations that some of the officers were making monkey noises. If this is true, it reveals a deeply degrading and racist response to a black man laying dying on the floor, fueling suspicion that this negligence was due to Chris's race. But we shall delve into this more soon. At 3:57 a.m, police eventually approached Christopher again and realized that he was no longer breathing. Christopher Alder was left on the ground for a total of 11 minutes. The police rolled Christopher onto his side before realizing that he was in fact dead. Christopher had choked to death on his own blood and vomit. The same morning, Jason voluntarily went to the police station with his solicitor. He was arrested for the murder of Christopher Alder and detained in a bail hostel. Although, a post-mortem was conducted soon after, and this revealed that the blow to his head was not the cause of death. This led to Jason being de-arrested for murder, and a new charge of grievous bodily harm with intent was given. On the 3rd of April 1998, investigators viewed the tapes showing the disturbing events at Queen Gardens police station for the first time. The family, including Janet and Richard, were infuriated by the footage, and they wanted to seek justice. Meanwhile, 17 doctors and pathologists reviewed Christopher's death. The post-mortem did not support the claims of police assault, identifying minor injuries likely due to examination differences, with no marks suggesting self-defense, and the punch causing unconsciousness was ruled out as the immediate cause of death. No drugs or pre-existing conditions were found either, so the key question remained: why did he collapse in the van, and whether or not the events in custody contributed to his death. Factors considered included alcohol, concussion, panic, or positional asphyxiation. As the investigation developed, 3 hearings took place in the Crown Courts to examine Christopher's death. Experts also held conflicting views on the tape's contents. One expert supported the accusations of racism. Others argued that the banana boats comment was a mishearing of banana boots, referring to the yellow forensic overshoes, suggesting that there was no racist intent. And then strangely, experts noted that the monkey noises occurred both before and after Christopher was taken into custody, and not during. Ultimately, it was concluded that the casual banter and attitude displayed while Christopher laid on the ground were grossly insensitive to an extreme degree, but there was no finding of direct racism. In the year 2000, there was an inquest into the cause of death. The initial inquest aimed to determine the cause of death without assessing blame. The inquest was intense, with officers refusing questions due to the upcoming trial. Despite not deciding blame, the officers didn't want to sway the verdict, which may harm them in a possible subsequent criminal trial. The coroner then presented 4 verdict options: either unlawful killing, accidental death, natural causes, or an open verdict, so an unspecified cause of death. On the 24th of August in the year 2000, the jury returned an unlawful killing verdict. This bolstered the family's hunt for justice. They assumed that this meant that the officers were going to be charged and imprisoned for allowing their loved one to die in such a horrendous way. This verdict led to the next hearing, a criminal trial in the year 2002 for the officers responsible for the care of Christopher that night. The officers were Sergeant John Dunn and police constables Neil Blakely, Mark Ellerington, Nigel Dawson, and Matthew Barr. The trial commenced in the year 2002, which examined the officers' culpability for manslaughter. However, despite the ruling of unlawful killing, all 5 officers were cleared of manslaughter, and the jury found them not guilty. This was not the result the family had wished for. Additionally, a 3rd hearing took place in the year 2003. This was an internal disciplinary held by the Deputy Chief Constable of Humberside, Steve Love. But in this case, the maximum punishment was a caution, reprimands, or loss of pay, not a loss of job. The officers were found not guilty of these accusations. In December of 2004, 4 of the 5 officers were granted early retirement on stress-related medical grounds. They received a lump sum compensation payment between £44,000 and £66,000, along with their pensions. This was far from the outcome that the Alder family had hoped for. Although, in 2006, the Independent Police Complaints Commission undertook an additional investigation due to pressures from the family. This report identified serious failings by several police officers involved, in particular PC Barr, PC Blakely, PC Dawson, and Sergeant Dunn. They were all found guilty of serious neglect. But despite these findings, again, no individual officers were held criminally responsible, and no prosecutions followed. And then, to make matters even worse, a shocking turn of events emerged 11 years after Chris's family believed that they had laid him to rest. In November of 2011, Christopher's body was found in the mortuary at Hull Royal Infirmary. So who had the family buried? On the 21st of February 2012, Christopher's grave was exhumed in a nighttime operation, revealing that they had actually buried a 77-year-old woman named Grace Kamara. Grace Kamara was of African descent, and because of this, it sparked a renewed accusation of racism within other public organizations. An investigation was carried out, yet nobody was found criminally responsible. Ultimately, nobody was held responsible for the death of Christopher Alder, nor for his burial presentation.